So we'll be questioning him on financial problems that are going to affect us post-COVID as well. So hopefully he will answer all these questions for us and give us a positive outlook. Let me welcome Anthony. Anthony, we have not taken Burnley since 1910. What is it? What do you think that swung it your way this time?
Well, thanks very much for having me. I mean, 2019 was a transformational election. It changed British politics, probably in the greatest degree in any amount of time. I think the thing that really swung it for me in Burnley wasn't just Brexit, wasn't just Jeremy Corbyn, who led the Labour Party so disastrously. For me, it was the real change that the people of Burnley wanted. What they wanted was someone who was willing to be more engaging, more out there, speaking to them about the issues that they care about and that I care about, and just someone who was willing to be a bit more out there, willing to communicate all the time, not waiting for an election every 4 or 5 years before going back to them to say, will you vote for me again? But actually it's that week in, week out, my job is to represent Burnley in Parliament and to make sure that I am their voice. And then when I come back up to Burnley every single weekend to understand what the issues are. So I think that's what did it. It was that ability to say, I will be someone different. It was a real vote for change.
Well, how do you think the current COVID-19 situation that's now predominantly in everybody's lives, and the fact that you're sitting in Westminster, I'm sitting here in Burnley, is because of our COVID situation. The COVID is disuniting people. It's separating people. But I hear that it's also brought in new dynamics within our communities as well. And how are things sort of affecting locally in Burnley as far as COVID is concerned?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, COVID has been so disruptive to our lives, locally, nationally, and as you said earlier, internationally as well. But I think what it has allowed us to do is to find new ways of keeping in touch with each other, using some of those digital tools like Zoom or Teams that have allowed us to have virtual conversations, sometimes with people that, we're only able to see physically once a year. Well, now, because of new technology, we've been able to see them, albeit not physically, but virtually, multiple times a year, really connecting. And it's about finding those ways that allow us to have those conversations and speak to each other, because in the early days of COVID, when the country was locked down and we were being asked to stay in our homes for such a long period of time, that's when it was so important that we found ourselves, found our community. And actually what I found in Burnley was the community really came together. That wasn't just virtual, but that was physical as well. That was food banks, gathering food, distributing to people who really needed it, be they shielding people living on their own, people with childcare issues. There's no silver line to COVID, but what it has shown is that we are a really strong community when we work together.
Thank you for that, and I'm sure that the work that's been started and the diversification and the ways of working that COVID has now highlighted throughout, it will continue to kind of flourish after post-COVID-19 as well. The question, I was looking at your website, I was doing a bit of research as to who, what, and where you are. And during that, I noticed this thing about the Kickstart. There's a local Kickstart scheme. The government has, this week, began this new Kickstart. And you've asked businesses, local businesses in Burnley and Fareham to sign up for it. What are they signing up for? And what is it all about? Can you please give our viewers some insight as to what Kickstart is?
Yeah, absolutely. So businesses have been through a really tough time locally and nationally. Many of them have seen their income drop, but the people who often pay the greatest price in any kind of downturn is young people. It's those people who are starting out in the world of work for the very first time. So what the Kickstart scheme is there to do is to make sure those 16 to 24-year-olds who are about to embark on their future career aren't the people who are left behind. I spoke on the election campaign about levelling up and bringing people together, and that's what this scheme is for. So through the scheme, any business that signs up will be able to claim from government the national minimum wage for that 16 to 24-year-old for up to 25 hours a week for 6 months. So that means that young person is getting the skills, is being able to immerse themselves in a world of work, get the skills that we all had the opportunity to get when we entered the world of work, but doing it in a way that those businesses that are just getting back on their feet is willing to do. You know, what we can't ask businesses to do at the minute is shoulder that greater financial burden. So this is about the government stepping in to say, we want to make sure that young people don't suffer the consequences of COVID, and we'll help them get on that working ladder as they do it.
And how much money has been sort of earmarked for this scheme?
So there's no cap to it, right? This is about making sure that all young people in that 16 to 24-year-old bracket who are at risk of unemployment, and that's the key thing, right? There are hundreds of thousands of young people out there who could, if we don't put in place schemes like this, find themselves on long-term unemployment with all the problems that brings for them, from mental health to not being able to get on the property ladder. So this scheme is about saying, if you are one of those young people, we're not going to cap it and say, you know, we're only willing to support so many young people. This is, if you're one of those young people, we're here to help you. That's what this government is focused on doing.
Okay, good, good. Can I just ask you a personal question?
Of course you can.
Are you a Brexiteer?
I am indeed.
Good.
I was elected on a clear promise to the people of Burnley that when they voted to leave the EU in 2016, I would deliver on it, because frankly, that's what we should have delivered on back when people asked us to do it in the first place.
So your winning has nothing to do with Brexit then?
Brexit has been a big part of it, but it's not the only part. You know, people in Burnley want us to leave the EU, and I am committed to doing it. But it's about so much more than that. It's about the things we spoke about, levelling up, making sure that we give equality of opportunity to people across Burnley, whatever their background, whatever their parents did for a living, it doesn't matter. My job is to make sure that every single young person, every single family can achieve the best for them.
Well, we will see, but right now we've got problems. We've got huge problems as far as the European Union is concerned. I remember I'm retired from the armed forces, did the Royal Navy, and in 1977 we used to do fish patrols. You know, we had these cod wars going on in those days, and my ship, HMS Plymouth, I remember going around the North Sea and the Channel trying to defend our waters from the French trawlers coming in to fish in our waters. And one of our major sticking blocks right now is the fact that Barnier keeps pushing for, the French even, keep pushing to fish in our waters, you know, to get our cod. Now, they get 80% of the quotas. 80 to 90% of the quota of cod is taken by the French and European fishermen, and that leaves 10% for our fishermen in the UK from our own waters. That cannot be fair. And after 31st of December, when we leave the European Union, what are the chances that we will be having cod wars and fish wars with the French and the likes from Europe as well?
Well, let's be honest about it. The common fisheries policy that allows European fishermen to fish in our waters has been disastrous for our coastal communities and our fishermen. You know, it's undone all of those historic communities that built up around fishing in our waters and selling fish in those communities and across the country. They've been decimated. And I think the quicker the European Union realises that on the 1st of January 2021 we'll be an independent coastal state. And what we're asking for isn't anything transformational. It's not something that's unheard of in the world. What we're saying is, from that day, the UK will have control over who fishes in its waters. Now, that's a really easy argument to make, but the EU's position is a really difficult argument to make, which is, yeah, we get that, but we still want access. And we've said, well, you know, we think access should be negotiated. It should be based on sustainable fishing, but also we want to do it within the context of a friendly free trade agreement between us and them. And as you've said, negotiations are tough at the minute. The two sides are pretty far apart on some key issues. And that, I'm afraid, fundamentally is because the EU is not yet willing to accept that we're an independent country. They still want to behave as though we're either in the European Union or treat us like a country that wants to be in the European Union. And actually what we've said, quite reasonably, is we're not in the European Union. We want to trade with the EU, but we also want to trade with the rest of the world. There's a big world out there of not just established economies like Australia and Canada and the USA, but emerging economies as well. And we should have the ability to go and strike free trade deals that work for people here, but that also work for those other countries around the world.
But you've just mentioned Canada, and specifically Michael Barnier, he said yesterday or the day before that if Britain thinks that they can have a free deal like Canada, then they are, living in cuckoo land because the proximity. He used the word proximity, and I was surprised to hear what's proximity got to do with it. Britain will be an independent country like any other country, like Canada. It doesn't matter what distances are. It's the sovereignty of a nation that matters. So we're having problems with trade deals because the proximity. Could you explain that? How do you square that the proximity bit?
Well, I wish I could explain it. You've hit the nail on the head. It's just a ridiculous argument. The EU has trade deals with South Korea. If it's managed to do a trade deal with South Korea, which is all those miles away, it's also got trade agreements with Turkey, which is on its border. So we're not asking for anything that is unworkable. What we've done in trying to come to an agreement is look at all the other trade deals that they've got and go, here's something that we've put forward that is based on all of that. And it was important that we did that because, the EU was very clear, and it's right that we respect their red lines, that we can't, have the best of membership without being a member. So we looked at all their free trade deals and go, here's what we're proposing, and it's entirely based on the deals you've done elsewhere. The proximity issue it's just a non-issue. It's a smokescreen for what they actually want, which is to try and keep us tied to their rules and regulations. And the British people made very clear that that's not something we're interested in.
And what are the chances of us getting a deal in European before 31st of December?
Look, I hope I hope we do manage to get a deal, but the ball is in the EU's court on this.
But what's your gut feeling?
My gut feeling is there's probably a 50-50 chance. If the EU shows itself willing to compromise over the next 6 to 8 weeks, then there's a deal to be done. But if they continue with this approach, then there's probably not. But the one thing I would say is, as we saw with getting the withdrawal agreement, these things always go down to the line. They always go down to the last minute. That just seems to be the way the EU likes to negotiate. So it might be a case of watching, getting a little bit further along than most people are comfortable with. But we've got the best possible negotiating team. We're negotiating just as hard and just as firmly as the EU side are. So a deal's there to be done. But if we continue with the intransigence on the EU side, then it's probably 50-50 at best.
Thank you. I want to just go back to COVID briefly. How do you think that COVID has changed the political landscape?
Well, it's clearly been a difficult time. I think the government that we've got has, at every step of the way, tried to make sure we're supporting everyone, be that individual families from things like payment holidays on mortgages, to the job retention scheme to make sure people stay in the jobs that they've got. But then we've also supported businesses as well, grants for all those small businesses that are the lifeblood of our high streets and our town centres, business rates relief, all those things together show that we've done probably more than any other country in the world. It doesn't matter whether you're self-employed, in a full-time job, a part-time job, on a variable hours contract, we've made sure that there is support there. So I think the government has done an enormous amount, more than anyone thought was possible. But all of that is to make sure that as we start to recover, we have a strong economy that can start to get, moving again.
I think, personally, I was thinking from the Chancellor's perspective, the Chancellor has kind of opened up the country's purses, given money like it was tomorrow. How are we going to sort of pay for it in the future?
So I think because this is a global crisis, the global markets that fund a lot of this borrowing have been quite receptive. We've seen unprecedented demand for UK debt, which shows the strength of the UK economy. But you're right, the strength of that economy and the reason investors look at the UK as a safe place to lend money to is because we have that strong track record over the last 10 years.
With all due respect, Anthony, lending money means you have to pay that back at some stage, okay? So Want to borrow some money? I'll lend you some, okay? Because I'm not going to charge you a fantastic interest at the end of the day, and you as a government has to pay it. You can't renege on it, otherwise your ratings will go down. So who is going to pay for these billions and billions? We've got over £2 trillion national debt right now. How are we going to square that with our future generations, with our children, with our grandchildren? Are we sort of spending our way now, right, without a second thought as to how it will be serviced in the future?
No.
Do you think the taxes will go up? Conservatives are a party that does not like to put taxes up. Is conservatism going to go back on its ethos, and its ethical values? Is it going to go back on it and going to start putting taxes up? Because something has to happen. You have to put taxes up, otherwise you cannot put back. The money that we borrowed cannot be repaid.
Yeah.
So will government put the taxes up?
Look, you're absolutely right. The reason we've been able to access those debt markets is because investors know that when it comes to paying back money, we are a safe pair of hands. And so that's why, we've had this unprecedented amount of financial support so far. But now as we move forward into recovery, we've got to start looking at how we get the public finances back on a sustainable footing. That's what the Chancellor is focused on doing. I can't anticipate what he's going to decide, but as a party, you're right, we are a low tax party because that's how you generate jobs, generate a strong economy. But unprecedented levels of support have been provided. So, there's probably going to be a little bit of both. We're going to have to look at which bits of the economy can shoulder a bit more of the burden, but also which bits of the economy are going to be those drivers of the future. Taking some bets on some of the big industries that might propel us into the 22nd century, right? So if the 22nd century is full of hydrogen power, then let's take that bet, because that's going to be the thing that sustains the public sector. It's going to be the thing that pays taxes in the future. So actually, that's the Chancellor's job now. It's to find the things that will drive the economy forward so that investors know that as our economy grows, we'll pay back some of that debt.
Do you think that we could have had a little bit of a less impact on our economy had the government taken a decisive decision as to when they started to take COVID seriously? Do you think that the government left it too late before it took a decisive action? Or do you think when in December in 2019 it was brought to the general world's attention that an incident has taken place in Wuhan, in China, that we should have then acted then and not wait till 26th or 25th of March to eventually start to realize that, yes, we're going to get affected by it? We wasted, do you think we wasted valuable 2-3 months when we could have done a lot more to protect the public and not have had to spend all these billions of pounds on trying to resurrect things, save things afterwards?
I think as soon as we knew the scale of the crisis, and let's not forget that, early on in this crisis, there was attempts to try and suppress what was going on. It wasn't initially clear what the scale of the virus was, how infectious it was, how dangerous it was. And as those facts began to emerge, the government really got a grip on this very, very quickly. So I don't think I would say the government tackled this slowly, tackled it wrongly. I think as soon as we knew the scale of the problem, and let's not forget, the United Kingdom has never, ever been locked down in the way it was in March. That was an unprecedented action undertaken by government. And it is not something that I think any government should undertake lightly, to really restrict the freedom and liberties of citizens in the way that we had to do, which was all about protecting public health. If that decision had been taken really early on as a preventative, or we're not quite sure what's going on, I certainly wouldn't have supported. But more importantly, I don't think people in Burnley or the rest of the country would have supported it, because there'd have been no scientific basis for it. But as soon as the science said, actually, we think we need to really limit social interaction for a period of time, that's the action the government has taken. And since that point, what we've been doing is looking at the data to go, well, which parts can we unlock as early as possible to make sure people can see friends and family, but businesses can start to open? Because as you said, we need to start paying back some of this debt that we've had to borrow. And the only way we can do that is by getting businesses working again.
Just sticking on this issue for one more questions with you, right? Bear with me because it's very important. The schools have gone back this week, in England especially, I think. Do you think this will impact the increase in the reinfection rate in the region? And what measures has the government put in place to tackle an increase in the cases due to the kids going back to school? And I think in the media this week there has been cases where kids have gone back to school, and there has been cases that are suddenly erupting with COVID. And what actions have people been taking, and what implements have been put in place by the government to prevent this R number rising with the kids going back to school?
Yeah, so it's incredibly important that we get kids back to school. That was, that is a total red line for me. It's a red line for the government. And actually, I think it's a red line for parents whose children have gone so long without a proper, formal, structured education, which is a thing that impacts life chances more than any other thing. So, it was absolutely vital that this September schools went back, because if we hadn't done that, things go on for a really long time. Kids have already missed out on been out of school for 6 months. That's a lot of teaching that we're trying to catch up. So it was really important we went back. But you do raise an important question about how we make sure that's done in a safe way. So over the last couple of months, the Department for Education has published an enormous amount of guidance that head teachers have gone through heroically to make sure their school buildings are secure, safe, but also places where children are still learning and thriving as they do it. In terms of making sure that any outbreaks are contained, this is not going to be a zero game where we don't find the odd case here and there in a school. But what we've got now that we didn't have back in March is a really strong testing regime. So that means if one case does happen in a school, very quickly we can isolate it, not just to that school, but to a year group, to a person, and make sure that that child goes away, self-isolates, and the rest of the school can continue to operate. That's the important thing, making sure that schools can continue to be a safe place for children to study.
Yeah, and finally on this subject, there's a lot of speculation about a second wave of COVID-19. Do you think that the nation is prepared to tackle a second wave? Do you think the Chancellor is going to open up the purse again for another few £billion to help? Can we afford it?
So I don't think that will become a necessity, because with the testing regime we've got, matched with NHS Test and Trace, what that means is if there is a spike in a particular area, we can really hone in on it. We don't have to have the national scale of measures that we had back in March, but we can isolate and go, here's where the issue is, let's deal with it locally. And that is really tough for local people, and we've had experiences of that in Burnley. But whilst it's tough, it is effective.
But you can't confuse that with a second wave. That's not a second wave, is it? Second wave would be on the level that when we first started in April, in March, I should say. That's the kind of level of reinfection that takes place. That's what we call second wave, not pockets like that you're trying to explain here. It's not regionalized anymore. It's going to be national once again. That's what I understand by second wave. If you can explain it to our viewers as to what you think what second wave would mean to them.
So I agree. That's often how second wave is interpreted. But because the testing regime is as it was, and back in March, we didn't have the capacity to do any tests, and now we can do more than 300,000 every single day. So what that means is that broad spread across the country shouldn't happen, because what we can do is find where it's starting to spread, and as soon as we've found it, we isolate it and contain it. So once we've done that, that stops this national spread, which would, to use your term, create a second wave. There shouldn't be a wave, there should be local outbreaks. That's what the testing regime's there for. That's what NHS Test and Trace has been set up to do.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to take a break now, and then we'll be right back. Welcome back to The Issues. You are here with Harry Boota, with my special guest, Anthony Higginbottom. We've been looking at the issues that are concerning at the local level and national level, and now I'd like to grill our guest on the international issues. And it would not be fair on our viewers, majority of whom are Kashmiris background, not to tackle the current situations that are affecting our brothers and sisters in the Kashmir regions. Anthony, we the British pride ourselves and pat ourselves on the back as the champions of human rights and democracy around the globe. Anthony, can I ask you a very bold question? What has the government done, this government, what has it done to help the Kashmiris in the Indian occupied, especially in the India occupied Kashmir region, who are undergoing huge and heartbreaking human rights violations on a daily basis, with girls, mothers, children, rape, pillage, all sorts of violence. If this was happening to one person, even one person in Burnley, you'll be up in arms. It is happening to dozens and dozens of people every single day, Anthony. Could I ask you why, as the champions of human rights throughout the world, why do we not even see what's happening in Kashmir? Why do we have myopia? Why do we have this blindness, a blind spot towards the Kashmiris?
So I don't think we do have a blind spot to the Kashmiris. In fact, it is one of the international issues that certainly dominates the parliamentary agenda that I see. And often people focus on what's going on in the House of Commons chamber, but actually some of the really important work that Parliament does is in committees and the groups of MPs and what we do behind the scenes. So I'm a member of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Kashmir, and that's a really important way for Parliament to get an update from all the different stakeholders. So, we actually hear on the ground what's going on, because that helps to engage us as MPs, but it also means that when we go and speak to government, we have some knowledge of what's going on the ground. And I think, the government's job is to make sure we are that voice for respect for human rights, for decency, standing up for the values that we care about, and making clear to the countries involved, particularly India, what our views are and how we think they need to go and address the awful human rights abuses that are currently taking place. From March, we went into what we've termed a national lockdown, and we found that incredibly difficult for the couple of months that we've had to live with it for. I think if the world could see what the Kashmiris are having to go through, that's not a lockdown of 2 or 3 months. This is a prolonged period. So actually, shining light on it, and I think programs like this are so important, being able to be that community voice, because the more we can talk about it, not just in Parliament, but across the country, the more the pressure builds. And I think, the one thing that all countries around the world want is a positive public perception. And with the British government very clearly saying that what is happening in Kashmir is unacceptable, the more countries that come out and do that, the greater that pressure is that, might just be the thing that brings them back into the international community to do the right thing. Because it's clear that what is happening at the minute is not the right thing.
But doing the right thing, the Conservative government has been in power for a decade. And in that decade, has a single iota has been delivered for the Kashmiris by the British government. There was a debate, a 3-hour debate, in 2017, in January 2017, a 3-hour debate in the House of Commons. First time there was a debate on Kashmir for 3 hours in the House of Commons. Paul Nuttall, MP from Bury, was who put the motion forward, and the motion was carried unanimously within the chamber. Now, do the motions get buried, or I'm glad that you are on the APPG for Kashmir, because that gives me hope, right? And I'd be on your back like anything, because as part of my other cap of Jammu Kashmir self-determination movement, we are the people that really put pressure on you guys to do something about Kashmir, and I will be, after this program, on your back about it as well. But the motion was carried unanimously. What happens to the motions that are carried? Can you pick them out of the Hansard and say, right, this is what was agreed, let's do something about it. Would you do that? Can you champion that for us?
So what should happen is Parliament should consistently be raising the points it cares about. And we were in, there was a scheduled debate on Kashmir supposed to happen earlier this year. And for COVID reasons, Parliament had to go virtual and debates like that weren't able to happen. But, there is a clear will in Parliament for us to continue to raise these issues so that the government understands the strength of feeling we have, not just locally in our communities, but actually as a group of MPs, as a group of legislators, for serious action to be taken and for our embassy in India to actually continue to make the case to the Indian government.
Finally, can I invite you to come and visit Kashmir?
I would absolutely be delighted to. It was something I wanted to do over this summer. Again, not possible because of COVID, but as soon as we can get back to international travel, I absolutely want to visit Kashmir, because I think the best way we've got of actually understanding an issue is to see it on the ground. And rest assured, from all the conversations I've had with my colleagues, both in the APPG, but also within the Conservative Party, we're all very keen to continue to make the case to government to work with the Kashmiri communities we've got locally and nationally to make sure we are pushing the right thing.
I would like to thank our very special guest, Anthony Higginbotham, the Member of Parliament for Burnley, for joining us today at very short notice.